Rehoboam's the ultimate hashtag OK Boomer, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks Weekly Podcast. This is episode 123. I'm Brian Sheely.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Episode 123. That's not going to happen again, is it?
No, not the way numbers usually work.
No, that is true. And speaking of numbers, we are in week 36 of our cross-training series. As we close up our conversation on this episode about watchfulness, we're going to get into a whole discussion about wisdom, gearing it toward the wisdom that we have in our relationships, the way we deal with others. There's a lot of ways that we can act skillfully toward each other.
Yeah, I love that word skillful, the drawing from the Hebrew word for wisdom. And yeah, do we try to get good at the craft of interacting with others well, of building people up, of listening to people, of navigating challenging situations with people, whether it's people at work, out in the world, people in the church, people in our own families. We need to get wise and skillful at our relationships.
I like that you use the word craft there, because I was thinking about some skills that I have. And I know you obviously were a designer by profession before you went into preaching full time. And I used to make a little bit of side money taking photos. And when I look back at some of those photos that I took early on, I'm kind of embarrassed to look back to those things and I really wasn't that good. I didn't know what I was doing. Looking back on it, I can see all the flaws. And I'm sure you probably look back to some of your first designs and probably cringe a little bit to think about the stuff you did, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You develop your trade over time, but yeah, it takes a lot of guidance, a lot of practice, and honing your senses.
Yeah. The attitude here that we should have is this sort of hypercritical approach where we're willing to see not just how everything is good and the ways we're doing things right, but honestly carefully looking at how we can do things better. I think spiritually speaking, we can always be honing our craft of skillful speech and the way that we deal with other people. So that's what we're going to talk about on the episode.
I have a friend that's a teenager. He's actually a senior in high school, and he uses this word that I love for everything in his life. He wants everything that he does to be elite.
Ooh.
Are we elite at our relationships? I want to have an elite marriage, elite parenting, elite friendships, just trying to do it well, caring about how well we do things, because everything we do to honor God.
All right, so let's get into our first segment here on the episode, and that is Like the Teacher. Again, we're talking about wisdom here on the episode, and there is a conversation that Jesus has with some Pharisees that really just show us how in control he was of his conversations.
Oh, yeah. Talk about skillful conversations here. And this is a conversation with some people that want nothing good. They do not seek a relationship with him at all. And it's these chief priests and scribes and elders that approach him as he's walking through the temple. And they say, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gives you the authority to do all of these miracles? But I think especially to throw people out of the temple. Who are you to do this whenever the chief priests, the high priests, the authorities over the temple complex don't acknowledge you as someone who has the right to change up the way we do business around here? And Jesus says to them, I will ask you one question. Answer a question with a question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? And he says again, answer me. And so they start talking to each other. You can't just respond to Jesus. Who knows how many this crew has with them as they approach him. I see him in this football huddle. Okay, guys, come on. What are we going to do? If we say from heaven, he'll say, well, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from man, the people are going to turn on us. And so since all the people think he's a prophet, they said, we do not know. And Jesus isn't going to give them anything if they're not even going to engage the conversation. He says, okay, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Are we going to talk about this or aren't we? Are you just going to try to trap me? If I don't play your game, then there's no engagement about what's really happening. So what do you take from this?
I was thinking about the times when I would go to those cheap pizza places growing up and play skee ball and get all those tokens. Like one of the things that I really wanted was that Chinese finger trap.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's politically correct to say anymore, but Chinese finger traps were always the thing that I was looking for because don't you love playing with those? You stick your fingers in both ends of it, and the harder you pull to try to get your fingers out, the harder it grabs onto your fingers, and it's not going to let it go. That's what I see here with Jesus. He is playing, like we've talked about before, like verbal Aikido with them. He's using their momentum against them.
Yeah.
The harder that they push against him, the more he just traps them in the things that they say. You look at their question, and I know the answer that I would have given to that question. And it is not the answer that Jesus gives, because they ask him, by what authority are you doing these things? My answer would just be a straightforward, obvious, surface-scratching answer. And if Jesus had answered that way, I don't think the conversation would have gone the way that I would have hoped it would. I don't think they would have said, oh, well, we believe you.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Jesus is choosing not to answer their question and being straightforward to them. And so the example that Jesus gives us is that some conversations with some people and some motivations are just not going to be straightforward. Sometimes you've got to think a few moves ahead, and you've got to anticipate where someone might be trying to trap you, where this conversation might be leading, and is there a way that I can speak truthfully and skillfully in the most persuasive and motivational way and avoid just wasting my breath and, like Jesus has talked about before, casting pearl before swine. So I think we see Jesus here doing the kinds of verbal jujitsu that really I would love to become skillful in.
Yeah, for sure. He is a black belt in verbal jujitsu.
Oh, for sure.
And you're probably right that it would have changed up what Jesus knew was God's divine itinerary for the way things were going to go in Jerusalem. And I see something very similar to what you saw here from that verbal Aikido that you were seeing. I mean, this cunning question that he brings, but with pure motives.
Oh, yeah.
It reminds me of what we talked about last week with the serpent and his craftiness and his cunning as he's talking. Only Jesus has these different intentions, has always positive intentions, which is what he told his disciples to do. In Matthew 10:16, he said, look, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves, so you need to be as shrewd as serpents, but as innocent or as pure in your motives as doves. And Jesus he's as crafty and shrewd as a serpent, but unlike the devil, he is coming from love and honor for God and a desire to do well. And the shrewd tactic that Jesus uses is, of course, asking a question that forces them to think. Jesus uses this question about John's authority, and the scribes had to deal with their own lack of a good answer. And I think at some point, if we go out taking a stand for Jesus, people are going to argue against us with some hostility.
Oh, yeah.
Not everybody is hostile to the Lord. Not everybody is hostile to our views, but you're going to find it. It seems like maybe more and more we come across this real anger about the views that we hold if we hold to Christ and his teachings. So how can we skillfully, wisely deal with their arguments? I'm asking, I guess, the exact same question that you asked, and I'll just offer one way that Jesus used, which is to ask them questions. Ask them questions with curiosity. Ask them questions that are thoughtful and that challenge them to think about their answers, because most people, honestly, I find, have not really thought about what they believe with any kind of rigor. They've just picked it up from the shows they watch on TV or some talking head or Twitter, or just kind of by osmosis of what's going on around them. And if you just ask people, like, how did you come to that conclusion? And then listen and think with them and say, oh, that's interesting, but have you ever thought of this? Or, well, what do you mean by that when you say that? And this isn't a tactic that I came up with. Of course, Jesus is asking these questions, and Greg Kukul has a good book called Tactics that talks about this approach to just thinking with people and helping them to see their flawed logic or to understand their own perspective. And as you engage their perspective, you can ask permission to offer a different perspective. And you can say, hey, look, I'm coming at this admittedly from a Bible honoring perspective. And so that's where my view is going to come from. But if you don't mind, I'd love to share it with you and see if they're interested. Like you said about pearls before swine, I mean, you can just end the conversation at some point if it's just going to be back and forth and nobody's actually listening. But you might be surprised how often there's an opening there. And what do you have to lose? I mean, when your motives aim for truth and love, what do you have to fear? I mean, if their argument is sound for what they're trying to tell you, then think about that. You might need to learn something. But the point is to just think with people, to reason with people like Paul did. And I just find this genius approach of Jesus of asking questions that he uses not just here, but everywhere, so helpful in my own conversations with people.
All right, so let's get into our second segment here on the episode, and that is Top 4 Proverbs.
1, 2, 3, 4.
It is almost impossible when talking about wisdom not to go back to the Proverbs. And so we're here again, now this time focused on wisdom, living skillfully. And so I've got our first proverb here, and that's in Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4, where the wise writer says, "By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches." I don't know, did you ever watch Norm Abrams and Tom Silva in This Old House on PBS growing up?
I know what it is, but I never watched it, no.
See, you didn't have to watch it because your dad was like basically Norm
Yes.
Abrams. That's pretty much how it goes.
That's probably true.
I, on the other hand, I watched This Old House all the time growing up. And I guess watching those kinds of shows, even like HGTV shows now, the big thing that you're waiting for is the before and after. Like, you want to see what happens to the house that was dilapidated and ready to be torn down when they went in there and they skillfully restored it to a brand new glory. We're wanting to see the hours of labor that somebody put into it finally pay off. And we get to, by the magic of television, see that within an hour. But wisdom is an act of creation in our life. And it's really taking the time and the care, like building a house, to create in us, build us into something that you want to live in. He says wisdom builds and understanding establishes and knowledge fills up all the rooms with precious things. Homemaking is like what we're about, especially during the pandemic when we've had to like be in our houses way too long. We wanted to go out more than we could. And so I think a lot of us were taking time to like create the perfect nesting place. And, we've primped and decluttered and all kinds of stuff. And I think a lot of us have been thinking about homemaking. And when we think about wisdom, that's what wisdom does. Wisdom is building something. And am I thinking about how I can build my house skillfully in a way that is a place that you'd want to live?
That is such a great picture. The building of it and then the rooms getting filled through knowledge with precious and pleasant riches. You just think about a really well-crafted home and then all of the pictures you hang on the wall of memories and the trinkets from your adventures. And what is it that fills and builds a sturdy house full of good things and joy and pleasantness? It isn't a pursuit of riches. It isn't a pursuit of pleasure. It isn't the things that we sometimes try to chase down. I mean, it's really from being skillful in our living.
All right, so what's the second one?
Okay, so proverb number 2. The discerning sets his face toward wisdom, but the eyes of a fool are on the ends of the earth. Like everything is about somewhere out there. We love to look out there, and you think about the ends of the earth, and a horizon that you can never touch.
I was thinking of 5 Goes West.
Yeah, I mean, you look to what's far out there. We love to look out there, to think about far off places or far away times. I'm guilty of this. I remember when I was little and we lived in Virginia, I got all of these brochures. I don't know where I got them, but I would like collect these brochures of vacations that I wanted to take that our family never went on. If we went on a vacation, it was to visit family in Ohio. That was the only vacation we ever took. But I had these dreams and I would work out the itinerary. I mean, we were going to stay at the Polynesian resort and they had this luau and I knew the rides we were going to go on. And I still do it. And, as a sports fan, I'm often more excited about the future of my favorite teams, what's out there someday, the young players that someday will be good, than I am about the current players. And just watch. This is weird. I mean, we love a galaxy far, far away, right?
Right.
I mean, there's just all the things that are out there. But life is happening right here. Right where you are. You have the chance to build that house, to build those meaningful relationships, to spend time with God, to get better at life. This is a verse that's, I think, about grounding yourself. For me, it's about anchoring myself in what's real, what's meaningful. And when I start to chase a horizon I may never reach, whether it's some project or some business venture or hobby or an escape into something. And like we all have these things, these ways to escape, whether it's curling up with a novel or watching Star Wars, whatever it is. And I'm not saying escaping is wrong, but it is foolish to spend too much time with our eyes trained out there when the good stuff is going to happen right here. And so that was a helpful reminder to me. I want to keep my eye on this proverb, so I keep my eye on wisdom.
Yeah. And in all these things, it's a balance, right? You have to be looking out to the future, but focusing so much on it, focusing so much on things that aren't here right now, that can be super distracting. And I think we've all fallen into that trap from time to time.
Yeah.
All right. So our third proverb here is in Proverbs 30, verses 24 and 25. And you know where I'm going here. 4 things on the earth are small, but they are exceedingly wise.
Oh, yeah.
The ants are a people not strong, yet they provide their food in the summer. So I'm just going to stop with the ants here. Sorry to ignore the rock badgers, locusts, and lizards here, but we're looking at these tiny little creatures, and the ants are a great example. They've got skills. I love this verse because I think wisdom sometimes feels like some high and lofty ideal, like a old man sitting on a pillow stroking his long white beard kind of situation where, it's like this unattainable thing, but wisdom is little. Wisdom is attainable, and it's attainable by little tiny ants, which is why I think the wise writer's really just sharing with us here a clear picture of breaking down our ideals of what wisdom is, because if an ant can be wise and skillful, so can you. And so why is he skillful? He's skillful because he's out there doing the work early. And doesn't that just make sense? Like, when should I be working? I should be working when there's food available, when the weather is good and times are good. But man, if I don't just love to procrastinate and I don't love to put things off and wait until the last minute, and I want to make sure I'm prepared in advance, doing that spiritually, doing that in our relationships, setting ourselves up ahead of time to have skill in our relationships, I think is something we can always be focused on. And it's something we can do now rather than waiting until the last possible minute.
Yeah, that's an interesting turn there at the end to think about that investment now for the future in relationships. Jesus talks about investing in people now, and then when you go to heaven, you'll have these people waiting for you, happy to see you. And
Yeah.
I think that's a cool parable, and no respect for the rock badger here from Brian, but
Yeah, I'm sorry.
great respect for the ants. No. And so proverb number 4, by insolence comes nothing but strife, but with those who take advice is wisdom. And what a gift advice has been in my life. What a gift advice is whenever you think about what makes a person successful. I feel like I've had such an advantage in my life because of the friendships I've had with wise people, because I have tried to seek those friendships out. Sometimes those people have tried to seek me out to mentor and to be kind and offer their wisdom to me. And I notice in those relationships that one thing that comes with wisdom is people tend to stop giving advice unless you're really looking for it. I mean, the older you get, I think the more you just realize not everybody wants to hear what you have to say, even though it's wise. And so you really have to seek it out. You have to ask, you have to lean in, you have to listen to those quiet-spirited, wise people in your life. And their insight is well-earned, and it's worth pursuing. And the opposite of that is this insolence that he talks about that is rude and thinks we know it all and doesn't value the wisdom of the people around us. It's kind of that Rehoboam, okay boomer mindset. Rehoboam's the ultimate hashtag okay boomer, right?
Oh, yeah.
All these people who were trying to advise him and give him some wisdom. And of course, he lost 10/12 of his kingdom because he wouldn't listen. And so just a reminder, one of the building blocks of a wise life, of a good life, is seeking out advisors that are wise and taking their advice, listening with humility.
I think being a mentor and being mentored is definitely something that we can be doing better at. And I like what you said there about how difficult that can be when you're not asking for it. I don't think a lot of people just want to come in, bust through the door and like the Kool-Aid man and tell you all the things you need to do differently. But when you're coming in and asking for that kind of advice, I know plenty of wise people in my life who would love to sit down and give me advice, guide me in those moments when I'm asking for it sincerely. And I think a lot of people see that open door. It's like letting the drawbridge down. You're not defensive, the walls aren't up, and you're honestly asking for that advice. Having people in your life, like you said, I've been blessed with that as well. There are plenty of people there who will advise me. I guess, am I asking for it as much as I could be?
Yeah, and it takes the humility to be wrong.
Yes.
It takes the humility to see another way of being and see another person's values,
right,
and say, maybe I should value that more, or to take another person's habits and say, yeah, I've gotten along just fine so far with doing it this other way, but maybe there really is something to doing it this other way and putting in the effort to change because I value this advice and I see wisdom in this person. And, being wrong and changing, those are two of the top 3 or 4 hardest things in life. So I'm not by any stretch saying that this is always easy, but it is good and helpful.
Okay, Boomer, let's move on to our third segment here on the episode.
I'm like 2 generations removed from a boomer, but boy, do I feel like a boomer.
And that is Through the Week.
I am ready to face any challenges that might be foolish enough to face me.
So every week we drop 5 challenges that we're going to do, and we encourage you to do them along with us. We're going to start out the week by reading something, and what are we reading this week?
We're going to read Mark 11:27-33, Luke 11:29-32, Proverbs 1:20-33, Proverbs 4:1-9, and Ephesians 5:6-21. And that passage in Proverbs 4, it's almost funny how simple it is. It says, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, and whatever you get insight. And just get it. It's like, just do it, but just get it. So my dad was a smoker from the time he was a young kid, like a teenager, when he started smoking. And when he was about my age that I am right now, he stopped. And I remember it. And a few years after he quit smoking, I asked him about how he did it. And of course, there's this whole industry of aids for quitting smoking. There's gum and there's helplines and there's hypnotism and there's all kinds of stuff. So, hey, Dad, how'd you stop smoking? And he said, I decided to quit. Like, okay.
That was easy.
He just decided, yeah. Oh, okay. That's the secret. And sometimes the solution isn't in like these clever strategies and expensive resources. It's just about wanting it bad enough. It's just about deciding. And that's more or less what the Proverbs say about how to become wise. If you want to become this wise person, where do you start? Well, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Whatever you get insight. Like, how do you get wisdom? Go get it, chase after it, want it, make your whole life about becoming more wise. It's kind of like we've been talking the last few episodes about what's the game.
Oh, yes.
And the Proverbs writer wants us to see the whole game is getting wisdom, making better choices. If you can do that, if you can make good decisions, if you can live with skill in your relationships, in your everything, in your finances, in your work, in your, most of all, your moral and spiritual choices, if you can do that, then your life will go well into eternity. And that's the whole thing, is get up every morning trying to get wisdom.
I think that's exactly the point here in this whole episode. It's like, if I could give you a 4-step thing, or like, oh, go buy this product and you'll get wisdom. It's like, no, that doesn't work in any other aspect of life. Like, you don't go out and buy a fancy pen and become a writer, and you don't go buy a real nice camera and become a great photographer. Like, you go out there and you put in the work, and everybody knows that. It's just a hard pill to swallow. And so I think that kind of leads into our reflect challenge, actually, which is to ask ourselves this question: what areas of my life could use some sharpening? It's like, what am I actually working on? What do I need to sharpen? What skills do I need to develop? I think this is a hard question to ask for me, and probably for you, because I think we get used to the way things are. The more I get used to the way things are, that sure can just really blind me to there being a better and more productive way to live and to act. I think it's hard to see that things can be better. Like, how many times have I been working out in the garage on some project, and I've been using the wrong tool, and I've just been muscling through it and trying to get the thing done, when all I had to do was stop and realize, look, I need to go grab that other wrench, because that's actually the thing that would make this job easier. But I don't think that way sometimes. I just want to muscle through it and I want to get it done, but I'm doing it the hard way. When we start to see that we can stop, think about things, reevaluate, find a more efficient tool, then I can start moving forward with more ease. And so the question, what can you sharpen? I think sometimes the answer comes when you think about what friction points you have in your life. Like, when I think about things in my life, jobs that are too hard or things that are more challenging than they need to be. Like, are there tasks that I could say no to? Are there things that don't bring me very much peace or joy? Relationships that I could invest more time in, time that I'm wasting, or ways that I could use my time more productively. I don't think these things are just going to become immediately obvious, because you just get used to the way life is sometimes. But if you stop and think about things a little bit more carefully, like, is there a way I can do this better? Is there something that I can improve here? And even sometimes small improvements are going to make a big difference.
That's very powerful. Look for friction points, and that is often pointing to an area that I can be sharpened in. And whatever those areas are, I'll take us to the request challenge. We can pray for help from God in sharpening those areas. And so our request challenge this week is a prayer taken loosely from 1 Kings 3:9, Solomon's prayer for wisdom. O God, give your servant an understanding mind to discern between good and evil. And I think this is a keystone prayer. This is, like that stone at the top of the archway that holds up the whole thing. It reminds me of times that I have begged God for discernment to make a right decision. Those crossroad moments in life. I have several friends, younger people, that are going through some major life crossroads right now, making these big decisions where the answer is unclear. And I remember discovering the power of, as James talks about it, the peace that comes from praying for wisdom and trusting God to give it. And what this challenge reminds me is how much I need that, not just at those crossroad moments, but I guess the theme of the episode, we need this every day. It's like, stop looking out there. Right here, right now, you need discernment and skill and wisdom to build your house. And how much of a keystone prayer is this, holding up everything else in my life? All the other stones of the arch are held up by me having the discernment and wisdom from God to choose between good and evil, to choose not just the wise decision, but the right and good thing. So I think that is a fundamental prayer that I want to remember to hold on to every day.
I love the crossroads there that you're talking about. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been at moments in our life where we just don't know which way to go. Not only are those moments great times to ask for the right answer in prayer, but even before we get to those crossroads, to have thought about those situations, maybe to have considered what we might do if we were in those moments. Really just to think that everything in our life is constantly changing, which kind of brings me into this respond challenge for the week. And that's to read Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 to 11, and identify your current season. And what is it time for now? And I'm just thinking here as I'm reading this, how encouraging it is to see that, yeah, there are times where life is difficult and things are not always the best. But the seasonal nature of our life means that things are going to change. As I start thinking about this question, I think in my own life, maybe I've been in this Ecclesiastes 3 verse 4 section of my life for a while where there's a time to weep and there's a time to mourn. Like weeping and mourning has been part of my life over the last year. There's been times where I've definitely taken encouragement from Ecclesiastes here to understand that it's better to be in the house of mourning than the house of feasting. And I think where I would like to be, or what it is time for now, I sure would like for it to be a time to laugh and a time to dance. Just this lightness and joy. I know we talked a bunch of episodes ago about just incorporating more joy into life. That's where I want to be. Living and moving through life with more ease, more lightness, not taking everything so seriously, not feeling like the weight of the world is continually on my shoulders. That's kind of my answer to that question. I'm sure your answer is going to be different because there are a lot of seasons here in these verses in Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, sometimes it is a time of sadness, and the only way we get to that lightness is by accepting the season that you're in, is
Right.
the wisdom of Ecclesiastes 3. You embrace the sadness when it comes, and you embrace the laughter when it comes, and you embrace each of these periods when it comes. And I think there is a lightness and a joy that comes just from that acceptance. And I think that's part of the beautiful wisdom of Ecclesiastes 3 there. And so I'll bring us home with our reach out question. What have you learned when you failed to make wise choices? So this is a question we encourage you to ask somebody and have a good spiritual conversation. And I'm asking Brian, what have you learned from your failures to make wise choices?
I obviously have plenty of failures to make wise choices. We could fill up the whole rest of the evening talking about them, but just thinking about how doing doesn't have to become being. Just because I made a mistake, that doesn't necessarily define who I have to be or who I am. And you know me, I'm a perfectionist. I like to have done the right thing, and I like to have really made the right decisions and have everything in line and in order. And it can be really deflating when I know that I shouldn't have handled the situation that way, but I did it anyway. You know, when I don't live up to my potential. I think I've tried to place failure in its proper place. Just because I failed, it doesn't make me a failure.
Yeah.
And I can get pretty hard on myself. I can throw a pity party like nobody's business, especially when I've really blown it. But I think it's helpful to realize that I don't have to stay knocked down. Like, I don't have to stay wallowing in my sadness or in my frustration over how I acted. And we talked about Peter on the last episode, and you brought out something that I should have known, but just kind of clicked again. Like, yeah, Peter did get knocked down by the devil, but he didn't stay there. That's something that every one of us can relate to. I mean, compared to Judas, who got knocked down by the devil and eventually took his own life. I mean, Peter was somebody who realized that I don't have to be defined by the mistakes that I've made. And he chose to move forward. He owned it. He learned from his mistakes. And that is so important for me to do. Not to make a habit of sinning, obviously, because that's when I am more prone to become those things that I'm practicing. If I turn around and say, once is enough, and I'm done with this now, kind of like your dad who just finally just made up his mind and said, it's done. I'm done with this. Giving up is an option, but I'm never going to move forward if I do that.
Yeah. There's a list of questions that we've been going through in this class that I'm teaching right now, there's 21 questions. And one of them that we spent some real time taking a deep dive into is this question: am I defeated in any part of my life? But like you say, you can fail and not be defeated. It doesn't define your identity because you're a child of God. You're more than a conqueror. You're something more than that because of who you belong to. As Paul says, all things are yours. And so learning to see beyond that moment to the broader context of your life, I think really gives us renewed perspective. I really think that's a helpful lesson, that doing doesn't define our being. And I guess on the other side of that, I've learned that foolishness is hard living. that however heavy it gets doing the wise thing, doing the foolish thing is heavier. And that goes with regret. You know, there are some things I didn't do well in pretty much every period of my life that I can think of, teens, 20s, 30s, every aspect of life. There are regrets. Praise God, none of them are these giant, debilitating, life-altering regrets, but they've all taught me that it would have been worth it to do the harder thing. I don't know if you've ever heard that quote about choosing your hard. Have you ever heard that before?
No.
Okay, so the quote says, marriage is hard. Divorce is hard. Choose your hard. Obesity is hard. Being fit is hard. Choose your hard. Being in debt is hard. Being financially disciplined is hard. Choose your hard. Communication is hard. Not communicating is hard. Choose your hard. Life will never be easy. It'll always be hard, but we can choose our hard. So pick wisely. And like foolishness, the Proverbs, right? Solomon and all of these wise people are trying to get across to us through the inspired writings. Foolishness is not going to go well for us. And yet it always seems appealing. It always seems like it's going to be a little bit easier. But as life teaches us, as anyone who has been honed by the hard choices they've made and the bad choices at times they've made can advise us, it's worth it to choose the wise, hard thing.
That's really good. I've never thought about it that way. I've always thought about sin as being appealing, but I've never kind of put it in that perspective of being hard. And it is hard. Like the consequences of sin are just devastating, and not doing the right thing might feel good right now, but of course, moving into the future, it's going to be really hard for us to overcome those things. That's good. Just choose what you're going to invest your time in, and everything that we choose to do is going to be hard on some level.
Yeah. No wonder Jesus says, my burden is light.
Yeah.
My commandments are not burdensome. I am going to show you the way to abundant life. And it's not to say it's easy because it's not. Yeah. But as another quote says, there are two pains in life, discipline and regret. And discipline is measured in ounces and regret is measured in tons. It's like it can weigh us down whenever we have to deal with that stuff.
This whole discussion over the past couple of weeks has been about watchfulness, really just opening up our eyes. I think if you could summarize this whole conversation, it is a wise choice for us to open up our eyes and look around at the ways that we can be better. And so moving into next week, though, we're going to transition our conversation into a discussion about fruitfulness, which I think pairs nicely with what we've been talking about here. We can always be more fruitful. And how do you become more fruitful? Well, it's through pruning. It's through doing the difficult things sometimes of sharpening ourselves. And so our first conversation about fruitfulness is going to be a discussion about accountability, really just focused on the fact that we can't blame our choices, the things that we've done on anybody else. We need to own up to taking responsibility, accountability for our lives, for our choices, and only then can we move on to becoming more fruitful for the Lord.
Yeah, we'll answer for our choices. God brings the fruit, of course, into our lives. But if we're not using what he has given us to produce, then we'll be judged for it.
All right, everyone. So thanks so much for tuning into the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find us on our website at BibleGeeks.fm. You can find show notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice, or at BibleGeeks.fm/123. You can also follow along with our cross-training series on our website as well. And if you haven't rated or reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts before, we'd love it if you went and did that. Give us a rating there. Drop us a review.
5-star.
Somebody wants a 5-star rating. And so we'd really appreciate that. And until next week, everyone, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.